challenges of the smaller market issuers across Central Asia determined to contribute to the global sustainable finance movement. So there should be one more slide. That's okay. So as we see, a lot of efforts are being made to scale up funding for sustainable development and the climate action, but it's not enough. According to sources such as UN agencies or McKinsey, there is an estimated 4 trillion USD annual investment gap to achieve the sustainable development goals and net zero targets. Development finance institutions are crucial in addressing this gap by mobilizing private investments through grants, technical assistance, blended finance. However, a key challenge lies in the underutilization of green, sustainable KPI-linked bonds. Currently, labeled GSS Plus bonds account for only 17% of total outstanding DFI liabilities, despite the large share of expenditures aligning with GSS Plus frameworks. Another issue is the low volume of GSS Plus bonds issued in local currencies, which limits the stimulation of local capital markets. Increasing the proportion of labeled GSS Plus debt will send a strong signal to investors about DFI's climate commitments and could result in better pricing. Promoting more local currency GSS Plus bond deals would also help strengthen local markets and mobilize much needed private capital. So successful examples such as the Eurasian Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank issuing green bonds locally show how DFIs can lead the way in developing local green bond markets. As the Green Finance Center, we are and will continue introducing new innovative instruments in Central Asia, be it blue bonds, be it green equity instruments or others. These efforts are essential to attract climate-focused investments, drive the region toward a sustainable future. So this was my contribution from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manas. I think this is very good, the connection between DBK and the AFC, the local players really making the difference, also to attract and mobilize international investors. How solid is the country and the region for getting what is necessary to really get the bonds, the loans, the issuances, the private sector as well. So there are many opportunities, and we have the standards, we have the financial markets. Although if you compare to others, it's not so in terms of volume, but for the local region, that's very emblematic. So we need to continue doing that more. Thank you very much for your intervention. And now we go online to Mr. Sean from the Climate Bonds Initiative, just to confirm that Mr. Sean can hear us. If we can get the connection. Oh, we can see you, Sean. Can you hear us? Can you say something?
Fantastic.
All right.
I can hear you.
Very good. Sean, thank you so much for connecting and being with us today. I will just do a brief introduction on your end. So Mr. Sean Kidney is the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, which, as we know, is one of the most important, let's say, standards for issuances in the market. I personally also enjoy very much the papers and reading all the material, the content that you have there, Sean. So thank you very much for sharing this with all the stakeholders and the financial participants. In 2016, Mr. Sean was named the Environmental Finance Magazine's Personality of the Year. And in 2017 and 19, he was voted the Global Capital Magazine's the most influential champion of the sustainable finance market. And Sean, this is what I think is going to be very important to hear about the sustainable finance market in the context of Central Asia, in our countries here that we are looking to channel more and how we can mobilize the international, to be more in the international radar. And what can be the possible ways that CBI and with the private sector, the issuers, the companies, and the stock market players, the bond market players, they can do more, especially here in the case for loans. But one of the questions that I also like to understand from your perspective, how to be better prepared for the future of the growing the volume of such debt instruments related to sustainability, especially to climate. And possibly if you can talk about also the transition finance in this region? We know that the CBI has very established guidelines for the companies to follow on transition, credible transition pathways. And how can be the hurdles for regions that are more landlocked countries, regions that are more on the frontier markets? What can be the drivers, or what can be more interesting to do next for this region to capitalize on climate finance? The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Conrad. And I've got a couple of slides, but let me just say something very clearly up front. The secret to action is you. We need the Eurasian Development Bank to do more on blended finance, on supporting the region with issuance, risk bridging, as we call it, taking some junior risk to ensure that deals can come to the table at the appropriate risk yield for investors, and with the capacity building that's required to help people figure out what's involved. You heard the comments earlier about taxonomies and so on. I'll make a couple of comments about that. But fundamentally, we need specialist institutions to help develop the market, and that's the reason I'm really keen to have had the opportunity to be here today, because I think the Eurasian Development Bank is a really critical institution in making this work. I mean, I will tell you my objective here. It's to turn you into a bank to support you to turn into a bank which is the bank for sustainability in the region, which helps the region deal with the changes that are happening in the world. That's the essence of it. Of course, I will say the same thing to the Kazakh Development Bank and to the others. But of course, we know that EDB is the center of all of this work. Why? Because we've got some big changes happening in the world. First, there is the need to reduce emissions and so on. This is in some ways less of an issue for the region because the contribution to emissions is very small. However, countries in the region have committed to the Paris Agreement and do have targets and so on. The second thing that's happening, though, is that because of the amazing commitments by China, Europe, India, Brazil, Indonesia, as of 2 weeks ago, and the US, which is unlikely to change under the change of presidency because there is money being made already in this area in places like Texas, the world economy is changing. And that means that the nature of opportunities for export are changing. I mean, in the growth of clean energy, Kazakhstan already has a challenge, an opportunity right now of upping uranium exports because we've got a boom in nuclear getting underway. But it also involves a range of critical minerals. You know about lithium, you know about nickel, you know about copper, rare earths, and so on. There is a boom of, let's call it, critical minerals for the green transition happening globally, and so on. So the region, the countries in the region need to look forward to how they can prosper in this changed world economy. So there's the emissions reduction, and some countries are doing very well. Uzbekistan in particular has been doing very well in that area. There's the green revolution. And there's a third area, which is climate is starting to hit, because in truth, we have failed as a global community to address climate successfully over the last 30 years. So emissions have continued to rise. They're just flatlining this year. They should have flatlined 30 years ago. And as a result, we're getting more and more severe climate impacts, droughts, floods, heat. We've had crazy weather in Central Asia this year, but this is not just Central Asia, it's everywhere in the world, in China, in India, in Spain, in Italy, in Brazil. In Brazil, we had snow down the south in the middle of the wrong season. They never have snow. It's crazy weather, volatility that we're going to see now. And that requires us to prepare. And that's the resilience agenda, which of course opens up more opportunities for issuance. So that's the challenge that we have to do. We have managed to get, on the basis of relatively easy things to define, renewable energy, electric vehicles, railways, and so on, a sustainable green bonds market that has been growing like nothing else globally, fastest growing financial market in the world for the last few years. When we started at climate bonds on this project, we had $2 billion US outstanding. We're now at $5.5 trillion US outstanding. That's bigger than the economy of Central Asia, and that keeps growing. We'll see about $1 trillion issuance this year. So the background story in terms of global demand and global shift is very strong demand for this idea of fixed income investments that also address a future risk, reduce certain future risks because of the nature of the allocation of proceeds. That's the simple idea. The types of issuers are all over, and we haven't seen, apart from Uzbekistan and the region, much in the government-backed entity, but there are 50 countries around the world now issuing sovereign thematic bonds, green bonds. And they all want to do more and more. They do the first one, they get great benefit. When Brazil issued their green bond last year, they got 170 basis points lower interest rate for the green format versus vanilla. Now that varies from region to region, but it gives you a flavor of what's going on. Of course, corporates are the biggest slice of the market now. It used to be development banks, now corporates, and then we have banks and, of course, state-owned enterprises all around the world are significant issuers. That development bank slice of 6% used to be, of course, everything. It's become smaller. The development banks in the region, of course, have started this work, like Eurasian Development Bank, but could do a lot more going forward to channel funds, especially as we get blended finance instruments. We can have dedicated financing covered by bond into blended finance instruments to leverage that capital available to us. The newest theme, as you mentioned, Conrad, is transition finance. Over the last 5 years, we have certainly been promoting globally an understanding that transition that is becoming greener is critically important. If you look at these industries, you get a sense of where progress is being made. There are bonds coming off the back of this, for example. We're starting to see a lot of electric utilities bonds and mining bonds coming in because of the understanding of the nature of the investments that are required to address our challenges going forward. But there's a huge opportunity across diversified economies. In China, the Hebei province in January announced a Hebei iron and steel transition plan, which Hebei produces 12% of the world's steel in one province. The transition plan is great. It's all about low carbon, green hydrogen being used in new blast furnaces and so on. And there's going to be a lot of issuance out of it. So this concept of transition is everywhere. 11 provinces in China. The Japanese government has started issuing climate transition bonds. So far, about $20 billion US worth of those. And in Europe, transition plans by corporates have become mandatory. Now, these are all opportunities for the region to be thinking in fresh ways about the kind of issuance that will attract global investors and the kind of support that we need from global institutions as well, including concessional finance. Of course, I mentioned earlier, the new thing we need to be starting to work on is around resilience. How do we prepare our communities, economies, societies for the change? And when I say resilience, I don't just mean hardening of infrastructure, which is something we need to do. You know, if we get great volatility in temperatures, and let's face it, Kazakhstan in particular has had a lot of experience of volatility of temperatures, but is that as much in Azerbaijan? Not so much. We need to be, we will get collapses of grids. Transmission lines need to be stronger. We need energy systems that can cope with greater ups and downs. That's going to be more storage. We need agricultural systems to change because what can be grown on the steppes will be different in 15 years to what it is now because of the heat we're going to start experiencing in summer and so on. That'll involve changes to our social systems, to our nature and biodiversity protection, which is going to be highly stressed because of drastic changes in climate and so on. You get the idea. We've published a taxonomy, a guidance in this area a couple of months ago. There's 1,400 areas to look at, which of course for issuers become 1,400 areas to locate projects where funds can be allocated that can be used to support green, sustainable resilience bonds in this theme. So that's one way of answering your question, Conrad. These slides, of course, will be available should people want them. But the other question you answer is about how can the region move forward? As I said, we do need pioneer institutions. We do need the Eurasian Development Bank and the other development banks in the region. We also need pioneer issuance. Now, in most bond markets, capital markets of the world, in fact, in all of them really, sovereign issuance is a really critical part of the ecosystem. It establishes benchmark pricing, yield curves. It provides a sense of liquidity to the market. When the Indian government started doing its green bond program in domestic currency, that was incredibly important to try and kickstart to kickstart the domestic market. And by the way, they got a lower price for the first part, about 6 basis points compared to their ordinary vanilla bonds from domestic investors. So I'm looking to countries to issue more. Uzbekistan's already done so, of course. We might see something out of Kazakhstan in the near future. Conrad, you might know better than I would. That's one part of it. The second thing is we need to uncover champion companies who have the potential to issue. And now we've seen a couple of those already in the region, in terms of renewable energy and so on, but there's a very broad universe of kinds of investments that will qualify in this market, which you will see in the taxonomy work we're doing with others. And I stress, by the way, there is actually a broad common understanding of what qualifies. We've been working on taxonomies, guidance for the market, all around the world for many years. Europe, in China initially, in Europe, there are 60 countries in the world now that have taxonomies. They all have their own taxonomy because national regulators need their own tools, but they are actually broadly aligned. Even in Russia in 2021, the VEB, the Russian Development Bank, developed a taxonomy that was supported by the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank and is in place to this day, which is broadly aligned with the European and the other countries' taxonomy. So around the world, we actually do have a fairly common idea. Now, of course, we need to add more in all these taxonomies around transition and resilience as we develop those guidance. That is underway. But there is actually strong guidance here globally to provide the support. And in the work we've done with Manat at GFC AIFC, he's acutely aware and appreciative of that work and can support people in understanding what to do. That work on taxonomies globally, by the way, is moving into a global interoperability project, an online tool for everyone to quickly understand what works globally. And that project is something we're working on with the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative, with Daniel's team.
Yeah, we're going to have
and
Daniel.
The principles for responsible investment.
Thank you.
So look, there's so much we can do. The opportunities are great. Of course, they're tied up with how we develop a capital markets economy. It's exactly the same agenda. The solutions are much the same. We need demonstration issuance. We need liquidity and yield curves from sovereigns. And we need risk bridging support from developed finance institutions. We need that generally. We need that for green. If we focus on green and sustainable, we could actually create really great opportunities for institutions who are able to issue debt in the market. Conrad, that's where you come in. We need your help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much for your intervention and for the good provocation. I think it's also very important to scale up with the national development banks, with the regional multilateral development banks like the EDB, and I think the collaboration for co-financing and also new funding sources, and especially when we can look for thematic funds as well, other issuance vehicles that we can try to do more. That's also part of the goal that our bank we have, especially for the next strategic cycle. So we're building up there, and especially oriented to climate. Thank you very much, Sean. And I think we can also move now to AIIB, to Mr. Siva, which is here on site with us today. And I think we can also take this point from Sean, right? So you're taking a perspective from an MDB, and then from Central Asia, like we do, and you as a global MDB, can look for this mobilization of the capacity in mobilizing public finance infrastructure in APAC. AIIB has been instrumental in delivering that for core infrastructure over the years. And I would like to know, in your opinion, Mr. Siva, how DFIs can effectively collaborate more between each other, right, to scale up and fill the gap on climate finance, especially in Central Asia. If you can have some examples, your thoughts from past projects that were successful in the region that you collaborated, co-financed, or provided concessional loans or guarantees. How can we do more for the future to support those countries that we have commonly in our institutions and other financiers in the region as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conrad. My name is Siva. I work as a senior social development specialist. Unlike many of you who are CEOs of banks or who are climate-focused fellows, I work out of Abu Dhabi. This is the first office of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank outside Beijing to give greater focus to the Central Asia region. We are nearer to you to support you stronger and larger. So we have our core focus primarily in the Asian region, but now over the years we have moved to Central Asia, we have moved to Latin America, we are now doing financing in Africa, and it's been a great journey. Now, coming to some challenges. Now, I was looking at the statistics. Over the last 7-8 years that we are in operation, we had about 80 projects that have come from this region into our pipeline. But many got dropped very early. And those who made it subsequently have long delays. There are very few projects which have which have been very successful on the way. Now, one of the reasons for this is we realized is that the quality at entry, the project preparation, the kind of work that needs to be done to make a project bankable. So this required, some kind of thought, understanding of what to do in this. So a little bit of history again. We are now about 250 projects in about 45 countries. We have about 110 member countries, as my colleague Runze mentioned some time ago. Now, 50% of our projects, out of these 250 projects, are co-financed projects. Now, we collaborate a lot with our other MDBs, World Bank, ADB, and a host of other institutions. And in fact, our environmental social framework provides us to collaborate with other MDBs and use partner frameworks to fast-track projects. And it's a great leverage that we have in AIIB. That means we don't push the clients to reconfirm and recomply with our environment social safeguards. So this is one of the enabling factors that we have. Now, having that leverage of providing our policy support to use partner frameworks, but still having projects not taking off, as I just mentioned, made us think that there's something that we need to do different than what we have been doing. So over the last couple of years, we have a new department called Operational Partnerships Department, through which we have initiated certain key steps. One of that is a TA pooling platform, technical assistance pooling platform. Someone asked in the previous session, do you have a TA support and how the TA support can be collaborated? Is it available? So we have initiated that in the bank, wherein we look for the TA pooling from other partner institutions to better prepare the projects that come into the project pipeline of the bank. The second is we have another mechanism or another platform called AIIB Plus. Now you have prepared the project, but then how to execute the project? That's the next stage. So looking at resources, looking at partnerships, looking at technology support. So we have another initiative called AIB Plus. Now, together with ISDB, there are a few colleagues in the morning, not on our panel, but ISDB and MCDF, together with them, we have also initiated a study called cross-border connectivity. In fact, cross-border connectivity is one of our key areas of intervention as a bank. And we believe that the cross-border connectivity will actually multiply the benefits that we would like the development as a development bank. And we have initiated these studies primarily to identify bankable projects. Now, these are some of the initiatives from partnerships and collaborations. I have highlighted the challenges, I've highlighted the partnerships that we have. Now, a couple of other things that have that we found are very important are to have, we cannot solve all the problems. MDBs cannot solve all the problems. We do need a huge private capital to be mobilized. And for private capital to be mobilized and private partners to be participating, particularly these are some of the examples that come from our operations in the Southeast Asia area, are unless you have a policy regime, you cannot have projects that are bankable, that can be implemented, wherein private sector can come and participate. So we have earlier this year, our climate policy-based financing instrument has been approved by the board. We have already started implementing this in 3 countries, Bangladesh and Egypt and one more country, I forgot the name, sorry. So we have initiated this in 3 countries. We are looking forward to take it forward.
Maybe in the future in Central Asia as well, right?
In Central Asia as well. Yeah. Then we also have results-based financing. That's another instrument wherein we prioritize our financing with respect to countries' priorities, which is now the climate. We have, as other colleagues have already mentioned, we are also in the area of climate bonds. We have already issued climate bonds and they have been hugely successful. We are also in the area of green bonds, which are also, again, hugely successful. So these are some of the initiatives from our side. We are closer to you. Just to sum it up, we are closer to you. We have had challenges that we have overcome with new ways of working. We would like to extend that. We have a policy framework that supports collaboration and working together for quick turnaround. And we have a few instruments that can support you. So we look forward to all our colleagues to support them to support the countries around. Thank you so much. I stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Very much appreciated for your thoughts and this sense of collaboration and the instruments that you have, the experiences, the pilot projects, the pilot initiatives from AIIB are very important for this region, and in collaboration with regional development banks, with national development banks and other actors, as I said, not just the MDBs. We cannot do all together and everything. We also need partnerships with, and I think especially I would emphasize the institutional investors, right? So you can mobilize and attract them for those projects, especially working on project finance. Thank you very much. And talking about institutional investors, other banks and other institutions, not as MFIs specifically, but the banking system, we also have online our next speaker from UNEPIFI, Mr. Daniel. I believe you are also connected. Can you just say hi?
Hello.
Just checking. Oh, okay, perfect. We can hear you. And now we can see you as well. Very good. Welcome. So we're going to have Mr. Daniel, which are leading the European markets and actions from UNEPIFI, right? So you're working for the membership leadership in the region, and you're really mobilizing the banking system, the banking sector in Europe, and also more and more, as we also have been discussing this in Central Asia, the initiatives that UNEPIFI is looking to foster more responsible investments and banking practices for the region. I think it's going to be very important to hear from your perspective and as UNEPIFI, what are the plans and how can this be fruitful for filling the gap, especially as we're talking here about mobilization of climate finance, how these institutions can be more aligned to really drive those changes and really do in a sustainable manner. So to the standards, to the principles that UNEPIFI is doing with the PRI, the PRB, and many others. And one of the examples that we have in our bank is how we can reach for SMEs financing. We do this indirectly with the banking system. So our partners in the region or local banks in the region, those banks that can be very, very substantial in the learning curve and the absorption to absorb the best practices from UNEPIFI and those standards that are fit for purpose, I understand, for this system and this sector. So I'll be delighted to hear your perspective on this, your thoughts, and how especially can commercial banks also contribute more for development pipeline of climate-oriented projects and support with developed finance institutions. The floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, UNEP-FI, I mean, for those that may not know it, so it stands for the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. So we are a collaboration between the UN, in this case UNEP, and the global finance sector. So we have direct membership from financial institutions from all over the world that join us in order to commit towards sustainable finance, sustainable development, the integration of sustainability into their actions, right? So um, mainly we have membership from banks and insurance companies. Investors are mainly right now channeled through the UNPRI, so the Principle for Responsible Investment, which was an initiative born within UNEP-FI, but that now has grown and become, let's say, a standalone initiative. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important to see these different approaches that are enabling the finance sector to act, right? I mean, and we can say that on one side, you have the usual business practice, no? That, I mean, okay, you can adjust as things evolve, and you can think about, okay, there's now a big push on sustainability. Let's try to work it out. Let's try to work more. But once you reach that point, I mean, there may be some limits of what you can do. So what we are normally talking about, and what I like to, at least the framework that I like to talk about, is to discuss between the importance of voluntary initiatives, such as those that we promote as UNEP-FI, and mandatory actions. There are those that are being developed in many cases through regulation, right? Because, I mean, we see that there are many jurisdictions, as also Sean was introducing. I mean, there's taxonomies all over the world, right? But what is a taxonomy? Okay, it's a series of definitions of environmentally sustainable economic activities. No, those that can be considered either green or social or in general sustainable, depending on how you frame the taxonomy. But what are you going to use it for? No? Are you going to be mandating disclosures? Are you going to be asking specific projects to be only financed if they are included, etc.? So there is, as such, a key connection between private and public sector. So we have mandatory, voluntary, private, public. So in the last point, I would say that there is a combined role between the private sector and the public sector to generate an enabling environment for sustainability to thrive. No? I mean, it can be done in many different ways. I mean, you can talk about it and to say, okay, what is the current sustainable finance market in the region, as we were hearing before from one of the speakers. But then the question is, well, are all of the sustainable projects being financed through earmarked sustainable finance? I don't think so. There may be many projects that are just being financed as general loans that banks are providing, because there is not a clear definition of what is this positive sustainability impact of a specific project, because may not be defined. And let's not forget that we're not only talking about climate mitigation here, but we're talking about sustainability as a whole, which includes other environmental issues, social, human rights, governance standards. So all of that comes together, and you need to understand, okay, as an institution, how do I want to move? What is the environment that I want to move? And also the public sector needs to understand, okay, where do I want institutions also to go? What is the kind of mechanisms that I can put in place to enable this to happen? So what I would like to see is like, well, we can work then concretely between private financial institutions and public financial institutions like NDBs in ways that would make sense in terms of understanding how this is evolving. And what I would like to say for Central Asia, I mean, within the UNEP definition, Central Asian countries enter within Europe. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm discussing. And what I see from the region is that there is a lot of opportunities, a lot of interest in actually acting on this. No, I mean, also Sean, I believe, was saying that it was one of the most rapidly evolving markets in terms of the regions, in terms of the world. And I think that is quite clear. No, there's a lot of opportunities that may be hidden, be it on the transition, be it on the pure green, be it on social elements. And I was visiting a few months ago both Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. I was quite impressed by how the institutions were quite keen on understanding more about sustainability and committing and understanding where else to go, and the public sector as well. So both sides were really interested in undertaking changes and into moving forward to enable these things to happen. So UNEP-FI, the issue that we have is normally that we have impact the places where we have members. So if we do not have members normally, we are a bit more limited in our actions. And I would like now to cover a bit what you were asking before in terms of what is the impact that we can have in the region. So right now, we have only a few institutions that have joined UNEP-FI, that have signed the Principle for Responsible Banking, including the Eurasian Development Bank. And I think we are little by little moving. No? So we started during the trip, like when I was there in Kyrgyzstan, we launched the PRB Academy in Central Asia, which is an academy based on the Principle for Responsible Banking, PRB, that is our framework for positive impact, sustainable banking. And what it is a series of sessions that can be chosen depending on what the banks are looking for, that go from the front office to the climate managers to C-level and board members, that they can learn a bit more about how to integrate sustainability holistically in the organization. And we're trying to expand a bit more the awareness, trying to expand a bit more our capabilities in terms of gathering more membership, that they commit to the principles, that can also make it more known to competitors or to other banks in the region. And I think we're quite happy to be collaborating with the members that we have right now and trying to do a bit more on that aspect. And then finally, I think you asked me a question about the pipeline, and here is where probably I'm coming with this idea that I introduced a bit before, is to say, well, are we sure that you are financing all of the sustainability projects that you can, or are you actually counting them correctly? Because if you only think about the market in terms of green, climate bonds, sustainable bonds, or loans, that is quite limited or limiting. You may have SMEs that are working with sustainable bioagriculture, but because they're not big enough or they're not defined as such, they're not being included into those packages of finance. So what I would like to say is, like, think about that kind of market that may be untapped when you look into the pipeline, and to say, well, MDBs, I would also assume that MDBs are not there to crowd out the private financing. It's more to crowd it in. And I think MDBs are also well positioned to enable this discussion, to see, okay, what is in the real economy that we can work with? What can we exploit as sustainability advantages and positive impact on sustainability that can be further developed? And MDBs are in a very interesting position because you can talk to the public sector, being public sector, you can talk to private sector, private financiers, being a financier, and you would have, let's say, these constituencies that are similar. You can talk to the financial institutions, but also to the SMEs or to the companies working on the projects. So being able to connect these different actors is a key advantage. And I think, if we look at it holistically from inside the organization and also from outside, it can be very, very important for the region's growth. And that's it on my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Much appreciated for your intervention, and this viewpoint from UNEP-FI, I think, is very instrumental for supporting especially the banking sector and other institutional investors. It's very good to hear their openness and eagerness to also drive the change and do their own homeworks, let's say, to that extent, with the support of UNEP-FI and other UN-related institutions. And that's exactly the point that we also have as our next speaker, Ms. Morris, which is also online with us today. Ms. Morris is the Economic Affairs Officer in the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing Development Division of UNEP-ESCAP. And I believe, Ms. Morris, you can already hear us. We're going to see you in a second.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, lovely. Okay, we can also hear. Ms. Morris, yes, now we can see you as well. Very good. She's currently leading ESCAP's capital market and banking sector climate finance agenda. She oversees the efforts to assist Asia-Pacific governments in developing innovative financing tools and policies that support the financials for the SDGs. And I think from what we have been hearing before from Daniel and the other panelists, what can be interesting from a ESCAP viewpoint is the tailored solutions you support, policy making and support for the countries and the member countries, the governments that you work with, especially also how to mobilize and increase what we're trying to discuss and approach here, the private sector climate investments in Central Asia, if you will. Could you share specific examples or your own viewpoints on how your organization is supporting the Central Asian countries in particular for building capacity, for researching those recommendations and policy, and not just policy readiness, incentives, how to facilitate that for climate financing. That will be very lovely to hear from your end. You got 6 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make it quick. Well, first, thank you very much for inviting us to this important event. And for those of you who are not familiar with SCAP, we're the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So we represent countries across Asia Pacific, 53 member states, and really work with governments in these countries to support the development of enabling policies to advance the SDGs. And that my team really underpins that through the financing element. And as you mentioned, I'm working on green banking and capital market development. And you asked how we're providing the support, what kind of research are we doing, what kind of initiatives are we looking at, and also on the MDB side as well. I'll start by discussing a little bit about what we're doing in the region, particularly in Central Asia, but also across the region, as well as some of our initiatives are looking to expand and are very much tailored to the country's needs. In terms of our technical assistance and readiness support for greening capital markets is one kind of work stream that we're working with. And this is really partnered with securities exchanges in different countries in the region. And those security exchanges really have the intention to green their stock exchange and increase the number of sustainable bond issuances that they have. And I'll give an example of this. First in Southeast Asia and then in Central Asia. One of the initiatives that we're running right now, which is a technical assistance program, is the Cambodian Sustainable Bond Accelerator Program. And this provides an opportunity for issuers to gain support in their issuance process. And a lot of times these are first-time listing entities, not necessarily fully aware on the entire listing process, let alone the special measures that need to be done for greener sustainability issuances. So what we do is we work with the exchange to ensure investor readiness. And how we do that is by first providing technical assistance to the issuers in their drafting of the sustainable bond frameworks. We've actually created a tool for this now so that it can be kind of self-generating. We define, of course, with them the use of proceeds, governance structure, all of those things that are required in the bond framework in line with best practices, including ICMA green bond standards, as well as local taxonomies or regional taxonomies. We also provide co-financing for the second party opinion costs to really ensure the transparency for investors and ensure that best practices are met in alignment with the ICMA standards. And of course, as SCAP, we are a regional institution that is neutral, so we are not providing investments in any of the bond issuances. It is very much technical assistance to help the preparatory side of this. But we do have partnerships with ADB, CGIF, which is the trust fund of ADB that provides guarantees, and Garant Co. to provide anchor investment and de-risking through these guarantee mechanisms. So this is very important kind of matching process as well with the support that we're providing. And it's not only on the private sector side that we're providing the support, it's also for sovereigns and governments who are looking to issue. And this is particularly in the case of Tajikistan. Our team has provided not yet getting to the bond issuance stage, but really the background analysis to support the development of regulatory frameworks to enable the growth of the green bond market in Tajikistan, coupled with technical assistance training on green bond issuance that we have a very strong partnership with Luxembourg Green Exchange to also support on that. So we're providing this type of support really on a request basis from governments. We don't provide this to all of the countries in the region, but we do it on a request basis. So if this is something that some of the stakeholders in the room are interested in, please do feel free to contact us. I'll mention a few of the other things that we're looking at as well. And I think the first panelist mentioned that they're also undertaking some of these initiatives. So I'm happy to see other banks doing this as well. But we're working with the Bank of Mongolia to undertake analysis on the climate impacts to the financial sector of Mongolia, not just a stress test, which is a short term, but really looking at it over the next 3 decades in terms of outward projections. We are also working with them to develop stress testing for 5 systemically important banks, and they will be running that first stress test early next year, and we've developed guidelines for that, best practices for them to be able to undertake that stress testing. And with the National Bank of Cambodia, we're also supporting the development of national financial inclusion roadmaps or national sustainable finance roadmaps, sorry. And this is very key, I think, to really making sure that we have the processes and the policies in place to make sure that the pipelines are developed, the investment is flowing, which is, of course, the critical discussion we're having now. You also mentioned a little bit on DFIs and increasing finance, and I think one of the underlying challenges that we see in the region is that we talk to the project owners and we talk to the governments and they say, hey, we have project pipelines, and we talk to the investors and they say there's no project pipelines. And really this comes down to the readiness of the projects. I was talking to one government official the other day and he said, oh, well, what do you mean by a pipeline? You know, I have a list of names of projects. Well, that's not readiness. One of the things that is very important, of course, is doing your natural capital assessments, environmental impact assessments, really understanding where these initiatives are going to be built, but also, you know, ensuring that the entire project is viable and ready for investment. And this is where ODA financing can really be prioritized, I would say, at the national level. But also in terms of de-risking capital as well, which is a role that MDBs can very much play in terms of guarantees, in terms of concessional lending, but also something that I don't think is discussed so much is political risk insurance. And this is what we've seen entities like DFC do through debt for climate swaps and other initiatives as well. So I think there's a variety of tools besides the bond market that allow for the flow of investments to be catalyzed across the region and particularly in Central Asia as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Thank you very much. Yes, I think you mentioned a couple of, and I took some notes, very important. Specifically, I think the connection with AFC and other regional, those players in the market for co-financing for SPOs, this is very interesting to hear. So this can be very interesting for Central Asia. The guarantee mechanisms that you mentioned, the request bases at other UN agencies, this is also can be work in some other streams, maybe so, I would say not so easy or easily tackled to do from a bottom-up perspective. If you have some projects or even in the private sector, but you see as a national interest or really contributing for the country, that can be from raising the request from the government level. This can also be interesting to split the interests or to add more stakeholders to the conversations, and the support of the stress testing mechanism for the Bank of Mongolia, if I got it right. So I think those are very interesting remarks you shared too, can be very interesting also for Central Asia. Thank you very much. And I think we are going to be, as our next speaker, going to try to narrow this also more to the region, right? So the Karek Institute now being represented by Dr. Vladislav, which can also complement this viewpoint, right? So more as on the regional perspective from the research side, right? So from the policy making, from the capacity, but I really wanted to understand how those barriers that we have in the region, like those cross-cutting challenges of climate finance that you guys research very well, kind of initiatives or programs that you understand are most crucial for the governments to take on, especially in the region when we already understand that there are existing policies, there are other frameworks that can better incentivize the private sector to be more on the active role, not just on the public financing. maybe complementing on climate projects. We all know how hard it is to do some adaptation projects to be really interesting financially for the private sector. So what kind of changes can still be driven or modified or suggested? And maybe the most beneficial mechanisms that you understand to connect between those two, the governments and the private sector, what could be done on not just on a policy level, but on other stakes from your perspective? And just as a quick introduction, as I just ran out because of the time, so you have been on more than 17 years of research on many different industries, and especially in the real sector, as I understand. And you have been appointed in 2024, very recently in July, as the Secretary of Karak Institute Publishing Board. So I think you can also share those very important remarks with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you very much. So as we conclude our agreement, my intervention will be mostly consist with bullet points. So thank you again, and thank you Eurasian Development Bank for organizing such significant event. Very impressive. A lot of fruitful discussions and interventions. So let me briefly describe who we are, what we are doing. Our colleague Zulfia from Asian Development Bank, she well described the Karak program. But we are Karak Institute. We are a knowledge arm of a Karak program. Our headquarters is in Urumqi, Xinjiang, People's Republic of China. So very briefly, our philosophy, so it's a publish, share, and impact. Our wonderful management team. So following our rotation plan, we have now a new wonderful director from Turkmenistan, Mr. Chermehomet Shaleev, to our deputy directors, Ms. Jinjin Huan and Mr. Kuat Akijanov. So I belong to a research division, and we all belong to DD2 team, which consists of three branches: research division, capacity building division, and knowledge management division. So we are focusing on ADB projects. Also, we are collaborating with Islamic Development Bank, energy and digitalization initiatives, and of course, Eurasian Development Bank, financial stability and climate initiatives. So let's talk about actions. So what we did for involving private business and private financing. Recently in Almaty here in August we had the first CI annual research conference, and first time we invited private business there. So they participated as speakers, as discussants. So in upcoming year we will publish this conference outcome. It will be a book with all research papers. So we also trying to involve private business and private institutes in our events, like research talks, our capacity building activities. So we are going to establish our Karak Institute School for Policy Makers, which will connect governmental officials, development banks and other stakeholders in joint collaboration to overcome barriers you stated. Also, we have a visit and fellowship program, which is a wonderful possibility for different types of researchers and other stakeholders to come to our headquarters in Urumqi and be involved in our research activity. So it's a win-win solution, because we gain, both parties gain benefits from participating in such program. So, oh, sorry. Where's my, okay. first part of the day we had very good interventions, and I made some notes. Dmitry from the World Bank, he stated that a green agenda already caused a GDP growth increase. So Dr. Sami from the Islamic Development Bank, he highlighted a significant domain, it's education. And I think the role of Carrack Institute as a think tank organization is being some kind of connecting point to bring such domains together. So why not to let private finance and private business benefit from GDP growth through knowledge sharing and capacity building? And we can be very helpful, especially in the Carrack region. So and encourage all participants to collaborate with us and to participate in our programs. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vladislav. It was very good and encouraging, as I think collaboration, especially on research, is very important. As we do also in our bank, we do have a very important analytical team and research on macroeconomics, and also that we tackled sustainability drivers and where are those points that can be used from research for actionable projects. So this is also very important. When we pave the road to find those gaps and try to fill them with those key investment mega projects that we try to do in the bank, those other smaller projects. This is also in collaboration with research, as we also do with Carrack Institute. So we really appreciate for your intervention.
And let me add
Please.
one more point. Recently, we had a very fruitful discussion with one of our visiting fellows. So regarding introducing ESG agenda for private business. And there are two parts, stick and carrot. All regulations, it's a stick. But our role is to show a carrot for them through research, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now we go to the last speaker, and we're going to be closing right on time. Ms. Olga, thank you very much for also joining us today. She's a member of the management board and head of international projects department of RKDF, the Russian Kyrgyz Development Fund. Ms. Olga has been more than 30 years of experience in the large federal bank and state development institutions in the public sector, and more than 20 years of experience in managing projects and teams, including in international markets. So I think you have a very, very solid background, and the question that I have, and I wanted to tackle as closing remarks for the day, as from your experience in the institution you represent today, right? So I believe the Russian Kyrgyz Development Fund, it really plays an instrumental role in addressing how to become more competitive economies in those two countries. How can the fund be used for addressing the opportunities in the industry, agriculture, energy, those core sectors that are necessary to really scale up the economics of our countries that are also two member countries of our bank. And the fund has also a very important long-term vision and mutually beneficial track record with our institution, right? I wanted to understand what is possibly, if you can list the role that the bank is looking to do right now and to play in the future to support Kyrgyzstan in achieving its carbon neutrality target by 2050, being mid-century. What kind of projects, what kind of instruments and incentives, and especially I would think if you can mention about Project Sense and maybe other initiatives that your institution is really paving the road for this climate target to be really achieved by mid-century. Thank you so much. I think you're going to have your exposition in Russian, right?
Да, уважаемые участники конференции, я прошу прощения, я, наверное, нарушу традицию.
Sorry, dear participants. Today, probably I will change the tradition of the dialogue. I will speak Russian, and let me present Kyrgyzstan. This is the Russian Kyrgyz Development Fund. So what it is in general regarding the country, regarding the banking system, our own capital is $57.4 million US, and the total capital of the banking system of Kyrgyz Republic is 1 billion 459 million. This is our share. And also, let me highlight that 3 days ago we celebrated 10 years jubilee, and we summarized positive results of our work. The main aspect of the result is the total share invested in the scope of the economy. This is 760.3 million US and more than 3,501 project financed. It is related to the global challenges as well, all over the world. It's about climate change and distortion of natural resources and necessity to transit to environmental technologies. And Russian Kyrgyz Development Fund is playing an important role to support that initiatives. For the green energy during the last 3.5 years, our fund actively financed small energy projects. And finally, the portfolio of our fund currently is taking 19.1% for hydroelectric power stations. Before it was just 1.2%. In this slide, let me highlight the names of the projects. This is what we finance. They cover the demand of Kyrgyzstan, 42%, 44% of current needs. And in fact, we finance 14 large-scale projects to build hydropower stations and 1 electric solar panel stations. It enables to provide 1 billion million kilowatt hours and to cover energy deficit 44% all over the country. And the total energy deficit is 3.2 billion kilowatt hours. The total scope of financing is 520 million US, and out of them is 175.8 financed particularly by our fund. Conrad asked regarding our interaction and assistance. So what we have calculated within the frames of the green agenda, the implementation of those projects would promote the cut of emissions for 1.65 tons by the year 2027, and it makes not less than 10% out of total liabilities of Kyrgyzstan according to Paris Convention. And by the year 2030, this index will be increased up to 2 million, and it will be 30% of total liabilities of Kyrgyzstan. Also, our foundation is financing green value chains within the frames of that projects. This is forestation and pasture reconstruction. Also, colleagues mentioned SME interaction and support. The pastures and those who are growing nuts, this is exactly representatives of small and mid-scale business entrepreneurships. And within the frames of this program related to the food security program, that is acting within the frames of the first program, together with the FAO, UN, we finance Green Climate Fund as well. This project of FAO will bring sequestration of 19.8 million tons of CO2 and would enable to cut emissions of Kyrgyzstan 50%. This is a highly important project, important not only for Kyrgyzstan but for the whole Central Asia in total. All the world is dedicated to develop green economy. I started to deal with this topic quite a long time ago, even before in Russian Federation. And this fund, till 2030, jointly with Eurasian Development Bank, and I showed Bishkek Solar project implemented jointly with Eurasian Development Bank, working on the solar panel energy, and another project called Wind, implemented together with the Eurasian Development Bank as well. These are the large-scale projects, but also we have many other projects as well, jointly implemented with Eurasian Development Bank. Here you see a wind farm on your LED screen. This is a very different energy source. In Kyrgyzstan, we start to use new sources of energy that would enable to implement the potential available in the country in general. And let me tell you that you can reach the point if you start the journey. All projects are highly important, and we are very much keen to work with all financial institutions, particularly with the Eurasian Development Bank, because this is the resource that would enable us to implement the projects, and to implement it not for us, but for our children and grandchildren, because the resources available on Earth, it belongs not to us only. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to make my presentation at this highly important conference. And everything we do, we should do the best from our soul and for the next generations. Thank you.
So we are ending our session, and I really appreciate for everyone being here today. And then we're going to have the final presentation from CTCN shortly, but before we just do our collective photograph, and I think, Dina, you have to run, right? So let's do it right now. Thank you very much, everyone, once again.
Thank you.